And welcome back to my speedrun of killing my wife.
And welcome back to Devlog. In this part I'm going over the option menu for Pep-Pel. Welcome to the least viewed episode yet. The option menu is something I have been putting off coding for a while because it's honestly kind of just awkward to code for, but it is definitely interesting and fun in organizing and placing out UI in a way that will function and work for setting option menus. There is probably a much simpler way of coding a lot of this to actually maintain the information of the option menu and then apply this to the game, but I didn't look into how to do that because I had a funny idea of how to do it, so I wanted to just do that idea. The first thing we have to do is apply the options on load, apply the option on level load, and apply the option visuals to the actual option menu, so the player has an idea of what the current options are and what they can change them into. Applying options on load is very simple. When the game loads, we create a game file, which keeps track of what the game's save file is. All we have to do on this is load up the current save file for whatever our option menu is, and then we can go about editing this option. We take information for this, such as the screen's aspect ratio, the full screen setting, the debug setting, the rumble setting, the language setting, the volume setting, and then we apply these information values to the current option menu's visual in the UI, so the text information for these is consistent. And this is pretty simple. We just feed values in and the values get changed. We then go about applying all these values. Once again, pretty simple. We set the screen aspect ratio, we set the input scripting to enable or disable rumble, depending on if rumble is enabled or disabled. We then select the debug UI and we either enable or disable this, depending on if the debug UI is enabled or disabled. As a side note, the debug UI that is in the top right and bottom right of all of these devlogs that displays the information about the character is actually going to be enabled in the full game for a visual, just in case people want to see it, because I think it's pretty interesting to have as a visual in-game, just so people have an idea of possibly how the game is coded. I also think it looks cool, and it's easier than just disabling it in public builds. And then we change the audio settings to whatever the current volume levels are. This is just editing the audio mixer in Unity. It's all very simple. The only thing that isn't currently changed is the language setting, because I haven't got around to adding a different language mode, and honestly I haven't looked into this. I get the feeling it's probably complicated. But realistically, once this is changed, it would just probably send a signal to change all UI visuals or instances of text to the correct language version. Luckily, Pep-Pel does not have a lot of language that needs translating. The UI, maybe the level names, that's about it. We then had to check when these settings should actually be applied. For example, when loading into a new scene, we don't need to reset all the settings for the aspect ratio, or the screen being full screen, or the volume settings, because these persist between scene loadings, but for settings like the rumble or the debug information or the language setting, these things will need to be reloaded when loading into a new scene because they are scripting and object dependent. For example, the player input scripting is unique in every single scene that is loaded because it's just attached to the player character, so this needs to have its rumble enabled or disabled whenever this script is loaded into. Luckily, I'm very organized with my prefabbing and player usage. Whenever I load into a new scene, I always have a reference to the game controller, and this itself has a reference for setting up the settings. So whenever I load into a new scene, and it's not the first time I've loaded the game, meaning I don't need to reset every single setting, I can run a different system that is just going to reset every setting that needs resetting on load, the ones that I mentioned, and also set up the option menus in this new scene with the visuals for the option menus that are already in the settings. And this is the main reason why option menus and setting menus is so fiddly and awkward because I have to persist a bunch of values between loading screens and keep everything accurate and only load specific things at specific times. And I know what you're saying, why not just make this a persistent thing in every single scene that you load into and not destroy it in new scenes? Because it's something that is used in every single scene of the game, the main menu and the playable scenes, so why even remove the option menus at all? Why load into a new one? Well, I didn't think of that. And I'd already coded it to make it so that the option menus can be accounted for loading in every single new scene. And I didn't want to change it because I've already made it at this point. Honestly, since the option menu also maintains the rebinding input menu, and that has already been so fiddly and awkward and breakable in the past, I am honestly quite scared to edit most things in the option menu the way they currently are, because I'm terrified that editing even a single thing will break the system for rebinding, and I live in constant terror of the rebinding system not working. Finally, we have my favourite aspect of the option menu, the fact that when you press certain options you can flick back and forth between values. For example, when changing your volume setting, you press the volume setting and then you press left or right to either increase or decrease the volume setting. The same with screen size, the same with quality, the same with language, the same with effect audio, and then pressing the select button again will set in what this value is. This is complicated to do with the way that Unity handles buttons. The way I feel it would be easier to do is make it a drop-down menu, but since I'm programming all of my games to primarily be functional on a keyboard or a joystick and not use the mouse, it's difficult to code UI that you can't click. So I've done this system where you press into it and then go left or right. I've probably talked about this in a devlog before, but you don't watch all my videos, so I can talk about it again. The way this works is I get a reference for all the navigation of this button. I will then unselect disable all the navigation for this button. I will then make it so pressing left or right on the input is going to toggle the information for this left or right, and it's also going to toggle the savings of this button, the saving settings of whatever this button is changing, left or right by one value or negative one value, depending if we're pressing left or right. So it's either going to increase volume by 1 or decrease volume by 1. An example of the volume setting, but others it would increase screen size or decrease screen size, or increase volume or decrease volume, or increase language or decrease language. Then only on select, which is pressing the button again, we're going to re-enable this button's actual navigation, so we can move away from this button again. We finish selecting the value, and we're going to apply whatever the new value is for this specific selection of this specific button we are highlighting, or were highlighting, to the actual settings. So when toggling left or right on the screen size, this isn't actually going to increase and cycle our screen size through all of the available screen sizes that it possibly could be, because that would be very disorienting to just add in an option setting. It's only going to enable this and save this and apply this to the options once we have deselected this button, and also we're going to apply all the navigation again, but I already said that. Basically, I've made a very convoluted way to have a button function and to toggle left and right. Also, we have a funny UI element that toggles left and right like arrows, and I think it looks pretty. Finally, we have the change for the main menu save file slot. If you remember in Devlog of yore, I animated a 3D backpack of Pep-Pel's backpack that opens or closes depending on the save file you have selected. So each save file is a backpack, you highlight it, the backpack opens, the information of this save file spills out. Yes, I'm very creative and fun with my game design. I updated that to be a sprite now, so it's not actually a 3D object, it's a 2D sprite. But hold it now, it's actually a 3D object still, but it's still being animated. How did I do this, you may ask? And how does it look oh so pretty and two-dimensional? I'll tell you, I drew different aspects of this backpack because I wanted to reanimate it because I thought the old visual for the backpack was smelly and boring, so I reanimated this in 2D. However, I'm not very good as a 2D animator, and when I say I'm not very good as a 2D animator, I mean I got lazy and didn't want to draw any more backpacks after frame 14. So what I did is I drew each backpack individual element as an individual visual sprite in a 2D sprite sheet and then animated these as a 3D object using three-dimensional planes, distorting these to give the impression of the backpack deforming and moving as a two-dimensional sprite, when in actuality it is several three-dimensional sprite planes that are deforming to look like the backpack is opening and closing. I really like how this looks. I realize I maybe could have explained that in a non-convoluted manner, but that wouldn't be a slick glib devlog if I did, would it? I really like how these look. I am very particular about save slots and UI in video games. I think UI in most video games is ugly and boring, and I will always pick the silly, weird option for UI visuals. Which is why I enjoy the backpack visual for the UI so heavily. I think it's just very fun and creative and makes the game look more entertaining just by the fact that the UI for a save file is this weird animated little thing. Speaking of weird animated little things, the devlog's over.